Welcome back, everyone, to Shadow House: The Gathering. Today we are going to read chapters 7 and 8. In the last chapters, Poppy and Marcus finally met after receiving their very different invitations, and they kind of know that something is a little bit off with this situation. So let's get started. Chapter 7. After the driver her parents had hired left her at Larkspur's gate, Azumi dragged her luggage deep into the woods and up the slow ascent, memories of her dark dreams scratching icy branches along her spine. The previous summer, Azumi and her sister Moriko had visited their Aunt Joachim at her home just northwest of Mount Fuji on the island of Honshu. Aunt Joachim had forbidden the girls from entering the nearby forest on their own, since it was so common for even frequent visitors to become lost there. With its thick canopy of trees that hid the sun and the iron-filled volcanic rock that messed with compass needles, the national park was known as one of the most haunted spots in all of Japan. Azumi had promised herself she'd never go back to Yamanashi Prefecture again. But the farther she strolled up Larkspur's driveway, the distance between the present and the past became shorter and shorter. Everywhere she looked, she recognized parts of the forest where Moriko had disappeared, lichen-covered tree trunks, dappled shadows dancing on the leafy ground, dew clinging to low-hanging, delicate mosses. Then, with a blink, she was there, back in Japan, remembering that horrible day. "Come on, Azumi," said Moriko, stepping off the clearly marked path. "Don't be such a scaredy cat." "I'm not a scaredy cat." Azumi looked around in disgust. "I just think that Aunt Joachim might have a point. Anyone could be hiding in there. You can hide too, and while you're hiding, I can look for more treasure." "Treasure? You really think the garbage that the tourists leave behind is worth digging through?" "Of course. How else do you think an explorer ever finds anything of value?" "That's deep, Moriko, treasure hunter." Azumi scanned the nylon ribbons that crossed the demarcated trails and veered off into the forbidden parts of the woods, disappearing into the shadows. The ribbons came in all different colors, each of them bright so they could be easily spotted by a ranger or a visitor to the park. "Why are all these ribbons here?" Moriko looked over at her. "People drive out from Tokyo. Sad people. They come here to say goodbye to the world. They tie these ribbons at the edge of the forest so that someone can find them after they're gone. Some say it's their ghosts that haunt these woods." "Like in Auntie Uray's tales?" Moriko made her eyes wide, her blue hair changing shades in the dimming light. "Exactly." Azumi shook her head, trying to look exhausted or annoyed, anything but the terror she felt bubbling in her gut. "No thanks. I'm not ruining my new sneakers. You go on, have fun. You always do." "Azumi," Moriko called out. "I'm kidding. Don't be like that." But Azumi walked away. She hurried along the lonely trails back to their aunt's cottage as the sun began to set. Her sister did not return to Aunt Joachim's that night. Their parents traveled immediately from Washington. The search for Moriko was long and exhaustive. No one turned up a single shred of evidence, not the Ministry of the Environment, not the local police and detectives, not the family. And Azumi never saw her sister again. The dream started shortly after Azumi returned to the United States. It was as if the trees behind her own home had become spirits of the bodies that littered the Japanese forest, calling to her, the hush of a breeze meeting the branches outside her bedroom window like whispers in her head. Here we are. Come and get us, child. Come and help us find our way home." Larkspur's driveway made a sharp turn, and a giant meadow domed by a gleaming blue sky opened up before Azumi. All at once the forest and its shadows were gone. Perched on the crest of the slope nearly 200 yards farther up the path was the grand structure that she'd first seen online a month ago, the Larkspur School. It looked quite different in real life, so much bigger. She took in its steeply pitched roofline and many gabled windows, its ivy-encrusted stone porches, the glinting windows that shone like ice against the dark stone walls, the turrets that lifted up like dark mounds of whipped dessert from the ends of what looked like passageways, and the soaring tower that appeared to spike straight through its massive granite heart. When Azumi reached the center of the porch, she knocked on the French doors, but no one answered. She opened one of the doors and peered at the shadows just inside. She heard nothing, no footsteps, no talking, not even the tick of a clock. I don't know if you can see that very well. Hello, she called out. I'm Azumi Endo, and I'm here for school. But no one answered. Excuse me, is anyone here? Azumi tossed her suitcase just inside the door and then sat on the wide stone porch she'd seen from the path. Someone would come by eventually. Until then, she'd take pictures on her phone to send to her parents. Mariko and Azumi had always been opposites. Several years older than Azumi, Mariko had pierced her nose and dyed her hair and listened religiously to their parents' old punk rock albums. Mariko's classmates had looked up to her as if she were a superstar, a trendsetter, a kind soul, and a creative spirit. The memorial in the high school yearbook had taken up 2 pages. Azumi kept her own hair long and straight and black as night, as it was meant to be. Admiring a clean look, she didn't put up posters on her walls. She always took off her shoes at the front door, just as her baba had taught her. Azumi didn't have a clue what her own memorial might look like if her friends were to make one, but she would have liked it to contain her 7th grade yearbook photo, the serious one in which she looked like a lawyer or a judge, her mouth downturned slightly and her eyebrow raised in a way that said, "Don't even think about it." When Azumi turned 13, she realized that she could never be as carefree as Moriko had been, but she could become a diligent daughter and please her parents in all the ways Moriko had refused to, with awesome grades and the most goals during soccer matches and classy friends who were as determined to succeed as she was. This was why her sleepwalking had been such a nightmare over the past year. She was losing control. Just like she'd lost Moriko, it made her want to scream. On her phone's screen, Azumi noticed a figure moving near the line of trees, several hundred feet from where she'd exited the woods. Lowering the phone, however, she discovered nothing there but the breeze moving the dense leafy growth, which caught the sun occasionally, making it seem as though someone had been watching her. She lifted the phone's camera back up to take the picture anyway. When a black patch appeared in the same spot on the screen, Azumi inhaled a sharp little breath and looked closer. The patch wavered before the tree line, as if an impenetrable shadow were being cast on that spot from about 6 or 7 feet above the ground. A human-shaped shadow. She took a picture, then zoomed in. Long, thin arms, stick-like legs, and a head that appeared way too large to be carried on such a gaunt frame. And eyes, 2 sparks of gold, watching her. The image shuddered, and the screen went black. In her peripheral vision, Azumi noticed movement by the tree line. She stood, ready to bolt away, but then 2 kids emerged from the mouth of the woods, a boy and a girl. They were carrying luggage. Raising her hand over her head, Azumi waved emphatically to the 2 travelers. They paused on the path and waved back slowly. She had just lowered her hand, not wanting to look overeager, when she noticed that, off the path to their left, standing in the meadow where she'd first noticed its presence, the dark shadow had reappeared. Slowly it turned its head toward the boy and girl, watching them, about to pounce. As Azumi opened her mouth to shout out a warning, the shadow lunged. "Hey!" she cried. "Over here!" "Don't be such a scaredy cat." "Shut up, Mariko." The boy and the girl stopped on the path, staring at her in confusion. Azumi waved them forward, swinging both arms up and back over her head. The dark thing was closing in on them, and they had no idea. "Hurry!" Closer, closer. "Run!" Something seemed to click for the pair, and they took off across the grass, sprinting toward the porch. The shadow creature loomed, large, gaining ground. "Don't turn around!" They weren't going to make it. Azumi dashed down the porch steps. In the meadow, the shadow's golden eyes seemed to flicker with delight that Azumi was approaching. She concentrated on the boy and the girl, who were now only a couple of dozen feet away. "Toss your bag to me," she shouted to the boy as he came up beside her. She grunted as she caught his luggage, but she managed to hold it tight. He wore another case strapped to his shoulders, something that looked like an enormous backpack. Azumi turned toward the house. A rushing, sucking sound came quickly behind them as they raced up the steps to the porch. Azumi didn't look back, not even when she swung open the glass door and pushed the others into the dark entry, slamming the door shut behind them. She scrambled to find a lock or a latch to hold it closed. She expected the shadow to barrel into the door at any moment, but instead, nothing. Through the window she could see that the meadow and the porch were as empty as they'd been when she'd first arrived. No shadow, no flickering golden eyes. She tried to swallow a deep breath, but released an embarrassing squeak instead. "What's going on?" asked the boy. Azumi turned, breathless. I'm sorry. I was certain I saw." She glanced over her shoulder again just to be sure. She felt her shoulders tense. "Something was chasing you." "An animal?" asked the girl, staring wide-eyed out at the morning. "Well, yeah, it was an animal. A big animal. It looked angry." Azumi shook her head. "I can't believe you didn't see it. It was literally about to bite your heads off." The boy stood by the window wearing a slight grin as if he didn't believe her. "It must be hiding now." "Obviously," said Azumi. "I mean, it didn't just disappear." "I guess we should thank you," said the girl, for saving us? "If you're going to laugh at me, then next time you can just save yourselves." The boy and the girl looked like she'd just slapped them. Azumi shook her head, embarrassed that she'd allowed herself to say such a thing. "Anyway, my name is Azumi Endo. I'm Poppy, and this is Marcus." The boy brushed his red curls away from his forehead and then saluted. He adjusted the straps of the thing he carried on his back, and Azumi realized from the shape of it that it must be a cello. "Do you know where we can find the others?" asked Azumi. "The others?" Marcus echoed. "The other students, the faculty, anyone?" asked. Azumi watched as Marcus glanced at Poppy as if they knew something that she did not. "What is it? Did I say something funny again?" "I don't have a clue where anyone is," he said, ignoring her question, the odd expression dropping from his face. "But it's probably a good idea if we take a look around. Right, Poppy?" Poppy stood there hugging her rib cage. "I guess so." "Okay then," said Azumi, picking up her bag. "Good." She peered once more through the windows out at the sunny meadow. Even though she couldn't see it anymore, she was sure the shadow was still out there somewhere, hiding, watching, waiting. Chapter 8. Dash and Dylan had insisted that the driver of their limo pull all the way onto the Larkspur property, claiming that they'd pay for any damage that the creeping foliage inflicted on the car. As the car drove off and left them alone, the boys found a pair of wide wooden doors. They knocked and knocked, but no one answered. Pressing their ears to the glass, the boys listened for a response. Inside, they could hear the echoes of their pounding. They texted Dell to see where he was, but the messages failed to send. No service. "What are we going to do now?" asked Dash. Dylan answered by stepping forward and pressing the latch on the door handle. The door swung inward with a resounding groan. "Oh, yeah." Dash forced a chuckle. "I didn't think of that." "Good thing I'm here, little brother." "You know I hate it when you call me that. Being born 5 minutes after you doesn't make me littler than you." "You're so right," said Dylan. "I know you hate it." He smiled that smile that always made Dash nervous, the one that Dash could never pull off, not even when he practiced in a mirror. The smile that said, "Don't be a wuss." They weren't perfectly identical after all, Dash knew, especially when it came to their personalities. With his stomach churning, Dash followed Dylan into the mansion. Inside, his gaze flitted around the cathedral-sized room. He took in the details, the wide oak banisters that bordered the central stairway, the wood pillars that rose to the pointed arch ceiling, the high stained glass windows that allowed shocking streaks of red and blue and gold light to filter across the intricate circular parquet floor. The boys placed their bags in its center. A harsh tone bounced around the room, ringing in Dash's ears, making him feel dizzy and disoriented. He blinked and saw Dylan standing a few feet away, struggling with his phone. "Stupid thing," Dylan said. "What's wrong? Someone keeps calling me, but every time I pick up, the phone goes dead." "What's the number?" "It says unknown. Service here bites." "But what if Dell is trying to get in touch with us, to tell us where to go? Why don't we try to find him?" Dylan smiled. "Do you want to head upstairs, or should I?" "We should stick together, don't you think?" Dash asked, trying to sound unafraid. He peered at the grand staircase and froze. A boy was standing at the bottom, staring at them. He was dressed in dark shorts and a white button-down shirt, but that wasn't what caught Dash's attention. The boy was wearing a mask, a white rabbit with shadowy cutout eyes and a big pink grin for a mouth. Dash had a bad feeling. It made him want to turn around and walk away. When Dylan saw the boy, he called out, "Hey, yo, what's up?" The boy in the rabbit mask didn't answer. He only continued to stare. "We're looking for Dell," Dash added. "Any clue where we can find him?" The boy in the mask took off, disappearing up the worn marble stairs. "Hey!" Dylan shouted, hurrying after him. "Wait!" Dash followed closely, not wanting to be left alone. But when they'd made it halfway to the first landing, Dylan jerked to a stop as if someone had yanked on his spine. Dash reached up to catch his brother before he toppled, but Dylan crashed into him, knocking him off balance. Limbs tangled together, they tumbled down the steps all the way to the bottom. Something like a memory flashed through Dylan's mind. He flinched, cringing at the white-hot blast that burned inside his skull. His entire body prickled with electricity. The world around him disappeared. He was back in the dressing room on the set of Dad So Clueless. Dash was racing toward him from out of a mass of shadows, his arms outstretched, his face contorted, screaming in anger or pain. A booming sound rattled his eardrums, followed quickly by something that sounded a bit more human, a mewling, crying whisper. The back of Dylan's skull felt like it had exploded. Little glittering lights swam around what was left of his blurred vision. Then, as the brunt of the sensation began to fade, Dylan understood that the whine was coming from his own throat. "Dylan? Dylan, are you all right?" Dylan realized he was lying down, the wooden floor of the foyer cold beneath him. Dash's face hovered over him, eyes wide, looking paralyzed with worry. For some reason, this annoyed Dylan. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Glancing over his brother's shoulder, he noticed the staircase rising steeply. "I must have tripped." "You didn't trip, Dylan. Something happened to you. It was like a seizure. You knocked us both down the stairs." "Don't be ridiculous. I don't have seizures." Dash leaned away, sitting back on his heels. "Fine, whatever. You're perfectly healthy." He sighed, frustrated. "But you hit your head pretty hard on the way down." It echoed. Dylan sat up, rubbing the back of his skull. His heart was beating too fast, and he worried that whatever had just happened might happen again. But he couldn't let his brother know. For the past few weeks, Dash had been super worried about him. "Well, I'm okay now." This had happened at least twice before, each time accompanied by a horrifying vision of Dash running toward him, reaching out to either claw or catch him. "Geez, Dash, sometimes you're worse than Mom and Dad." "Do you think you can stand up? Maybe we should walk back to town and call for help." "No way." Dash rolled his eyes. "But Dylan, you're not—" "If we find that kid, the one in the mask, maybe he'll help us." Dash shivered. "I didn't get that sense from him, Dylan. He was full-on creepy." Footsteps echoed through the cavernous chamber. Dylan turned to see who it was. Emerging from the shadows was a girl with long black hair that draped far below her shoulder blades. She was dressed in a fitted denim jacket and a long black dress. Another girl, with messy, dirty blonde hair, walked beside the first, wearing a faded purple t-shirt and jeans, clutching a bright pink messenger bag. Behind them was a boy who appeared to be carrying a tall backpack of some sort. He wore a black sports coat and khaki pants. His dark red hair lifted from his scalp in wide curls. Is this the rest of the film's cast? Dylan struggled to his feet. He stepped forward, holding out his hand. If he was going to succeed on this set, he knew he had to make the best impression before his brother could beat him to it. "Hey," he said, laying on the California cool kid charm that his agents had drilled into him long ago. "How's it going?" "Dylan Wright." He glanced over at Dash, who looked at him in surprise. "And this is my brother." "Dylan, sit down," Dash commanded harshly. "You might have a concussion." A flash of anger jolted down Dylan's spine and rippled in the pit of his stomach. Keeping his face even, he chuckled nervously as the group stared at the twins. "I'm sorry," he said. "My brother can be a little dramatic. Have any of you seen Dell?" And that's the end of Chapter 8. All right, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon.